Morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are out there in the world. We're starting another show and ending the year 2012 with the Health In, and we have a special guest, Dr. Robert Bruck, who's going to talk about pathogen evolution. Nature will find a way. This is an affiliate program of Homeopathy World Community. I'm going to send our love and wave to Dr. Deepak Sharma of the Orbits Clinic in New Delhi, India, who is not able to be with us today, keeping very busy out there in his clinics. And I would like to introduce Dr. Robert Bruck, alumni distinguished professor of plant pathology, forestry, environmental science, and environmental technology and management at North Carolina State University, and he is a sought-after advisor and speaker. I have a quote that I want to start with, Dr. Bruck. Rob, man versus bacteria. I have found something in my surfing across the web that says intelligence is a valuable thing, but it is not usually, you're listening in? Everybody can hear, right? We're on the slides. Intelligence is a valuable thing. You want to check the slides? Intelligence is a valuable thing, but it is not usually the key to survival. Sheer fecundity usually counts. The intelligent gorilla doesn't do as well as the less intelligent but more fecund rat, which doesn't do as well as the still less intelligent but still more fecund cockroach. You know they're going to rule the world. Which doesn't do as well as the minimally intelligent but maximally fecund bacterium. And that's really what we're going to focus on today.
I think you need to define the word fecundity. Fecundity means birth rate.
Thriving, surviving, living. And this was a quote by Isaac Asimov from 50 Million Big Brothers, magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And, you know, science fiction is not far from reality sometimes. And I want to thank Amnon also.
You're welcome.
December 31, 2012, we're ending with a bang on the last day of this year. And I want to thank all those folks who are out there listening and sharing and tweeting and Facebooking and letting everybody else come in with us on today's show. Thanks, Johnny and Vic and Dr. Ferenc and everyone else out there. So we'll move ahead with this special show. Pathogen evolution, nature will find a way. And for some reason, I have global climate change health effects. That was December 10th, 2012. This is a return visit of Dr. Robert Bruck. So if you want to see, everything is in archive. You'll just go to Homeopathy World Community or Nissan Communications, and you'll be able to see the previous show. And we're going to move on to, he teaches and does research at NC State University for 33 years. As an expert in the field of global warming, plant pathology, and forestry, he has testified before Congress. And the testimonials, I forgot to bring that great big packet of paper he brought home. How many students have you got now?
This past semester, I had 1,861.
Can you believe that?
They're going to save the world, too.
Well, I'll tell you what, they say he is the best teacher on the planet, that he has inspired them and entertained them and made them want to sign. As a matter of fact, a lot of those student comments said, in one of your classes, somebody took over for you. I don't know whether it was a student teacher or another teacher, but they said, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up to hear Dr. Bruck. So, you know, right? Your passion has always been to save the world, and the only way we can do it is together by teaching others and getting everyone to do their part. Your research, Dr. Bruck, on air pollution in forest ecosystems and your lifelong career culminated with you being named the 1997 laureate of the North Carolina Award for Science by the governor. and we begin the history of antibiotics. And you're going to start telling us what happened after World War II.
Good.
Yay. Now you can tell us.
Let's get started. Okay, let's give a little background first as to where this entire topic comes from and where it's going to. It happens to be one of the best kept secrets from the public. In many cases, the government really doesn't want people to know what the reality is out there when it comes to human disease in particular. But it's worth noting that this year is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin. And you say, well, what does Darwin have to do with this? And the answer is everything. Basically, Darwin wrote, of course, the book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. It took him 16 years to write the book. That was finally published in 1859. And we have to also remember, okay, that in 1859 there was no such thing as genetics. There was no such thing as DNA. There was no such thing as any understanding even about what disease was about. The germ theory of disease wasn't developed literally until 1864 by Louis Pasteur in Paris. So we're talking about a gentleman that saw, using a brilliant mind, how the world was organized. And basically, to summarize his 1,600-page text, you could simply say that what Darwin learned is that species and individuals survive because they are selected for. They are the winners, if you will, in the show of life, the game of life. 99.9% of all the life that evolves on this planet are losers. They do not make it. They are not selected for. They die off in the course of the process of evolution. So this is a really good place to start in discussing the fact that Darwin set the tone for our understanding of, for example, the fecundity of bacteria and how this plays a role in what's going on in our environment today. So we now go from the 1850s and we go to the 1939. And, of course, this was the very famous experiment by Sir Alexander Fleming in London. This is often how science is accomplished. It's often how science moves forward, and the word is serendipity. He was a medical microbiologist in London and, in fact, worked with bacteria. And by then, we had done things on petri dishes, those little round glass dishes that are filled with agar, with other nutrients, and he was growing bacteria on it. And one Monday morning, he wandered into his lab, opened up his incubator, and saw something. And what he saw was on one of the plates of a standard human bacteria, Streptococcus aureus, strep throat bacteria, there was a green mold that was growing on the corner of the plate. And as the green mold grew out on the plate, it inhibited the growth of the bacteria. Basically, 10 or 20 millimeters ahead of where the actual mold was, there was nothing. The bacteria would not grow. It's a white bacteria. It was growing on the other side of the plate, but it would not grow where the mold was. And, of course, that mold we all know today is simply penicillium. And that was the beginning of the age of modern antibiotics. Being a mind that could think and be able to discern something that was important, he started experimenting with that mold. He started making extracts of that mold by growing it in culture and found out that a substance that was in the mold, a compound that we now call penicillin, was inhibitory to a huge array of gram-negative bacteria, which are many of them pathogens of human beings. And so it began the age of antibiotics. It is actually very interesting to even talk about the history of World War II, is that, of course, one of the major causes of mortality in war is not being necessarily killed outright, but by being wounded. It's estimated that during the Civil War in the United States, that over two-thirds of the people, the 700,000 Americans that died during that war, were not killed on the battlefield, but ended up dying in the hospital from the wounds that they received, from sepsis that are primarily caused by bacteria and or virus, and they died. And it was indeed the development of these early antibiotics that really, in many ways, helped win the war for Britain and the United States. Literally, they would have a powder of penicillin, and on a wound, they would open up the packet and they would pour that powder on it. That caused a diminution of the amount of bacterial replication and had saved many lives. So beginning in the 1950s, there was a mad rush all around the world to discover new forms of antibiosis. And indeed, we looked, this is called biological prospecting. We were looking at all types of organisms, but particularly a group of fungi known as the actinomycetes, which penicillin is a member of, the actinomycetes. And from those things, we developed dozens of different antibiotics. And, you know, it's really interesting. When I talk about this particular subject in class, let's say I'm standing in front of a class of 500 students. I will say, okay, I don't want to embarrass anybody, and we're not going to talk about names, but how many of you would probably not be alive today? These are 18 and 19-year-old kids. If it wasn't for antibiotics, and literally two-thirds of the hands in the classroom are raised. Because indeed, before the age of antibiotics, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, something as a simple strep throat could end up becoming rheumatic heart fever, which could kill you. Many times you would get an infection after having a viral infection due to a weakened immune system that would end up being pneumonia. And back then, most pneumonias were caused by bacteria, and you died. It was simple as that.
I'm going to interject a comment.
Yes.
Dr. Ferenc has mentioned, do you know which remedy is used for infection? And he mentioned pyrogen. Homeopathically, it can be used for sepsis, for blood infection, for all kinds of infection. And homeopathy has many other remedies that can be used in cases of wounds. For gangrene, what do we use? Gunpowder, homeopathic gunpowder. So there are ways, and in many
Aren't there a number of nosodes that are also used for infections?
Yes, and there are nosodes. So there are a lot of ways that we can heal the body with using the simillimum instead of an anti against the body and depressing the body, because, you know, the antibiotic is going to kill everything that's growing. It's not just going to target in on the one little thing that needs help.
We'll get to that. We will discuss that.
Okay, so we want to just interject here that homeopathy is a very powerful way of healing. And yes, many young students and our own children, we felt, would not have gotten through, and even ourselves, if we didn't have antibiotics in many cases of infection. But maybe it's because of our lifestyle. Maybe because of many of the things that we didn't know, or were blind to, or unaware, or were not taught. And that's one of the things that we need to emphasize, that living in harmony with our environment and learning the proper ways of sanitation, et cetera. I'm sure you're going to get to that.
Yeah, and you hit a very good point in the sense that living in harmony, let's get down to the famous ditty that, don't mess with Mother Nature. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. So, again, let's move on with our history. Basically, a major part of pharmacological research today at all the big drug companies, at the NIH, is working with compounds, natural compounds, that come from nature. Sometimes they synthesize them, sometimes they change them for the purpose of being able to destroy bacteria or virus. That is what antibiotic means. Biotic means life, anti means against life. And, without getting into the problems, that's what we're going to talk about today. I think we all have to admit that there have been many, many thousands or millions of lives saved by the use of antibiotics around the world. But, and now the big but comes to play. Basically, back during the 1950s up to the present, antibiotics became the panacea. It became the thing. Okay, when a mom brought a child to the pediatrician and the child had an earache, the child had a sore throat, the child was coughing, the child was sneezing, immediately, without even thinking, a physician would write a script for one of the numerous antibiotics that were out there. We now know today, and it's something that a lot of people simply do not understand, that probably 90% of the visits that are paid to a primary care physician, particularly with children, who are coughing and sneezing and my head hurts and my ear hurts, are not going to respond to any antibiotic. They have a viral infection. The infection will run its course and it will be over. Yet, literally for 50 years, hundreds of millions of prescriptions for antibiotics were given. And that's going to be the root of the rest of our discussion today. And this is around the world. This is not just in the United States. Interestingly, I was reading an article yesterday that the country that prescribes more antibiotics than any other, interestingly, is Australia. Okay, Australia. I don't know where that came from. But, they, on a per capita basis, their doctors are handing it out. So, what does this mean? Let's think about it from a very simple conceptual framework. You began the talk today by discussing fecundity, the fact that an elephant, might, that lives 80, 90 years, has several babies during their lifetime, they do not have a very high reproductive rate. Human beings, compared to other organisms, do not have a very high reproductive rate. We know by the study of phylogenetics and molecular biology that for there to be major changes in, for example, human populations due to evolution, due to genetic change, takes tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. So that we need to understand right away. We're going to principally be talking about human beings today. We can talk about all kinds of things, but we're talking about people. So even though, we only live for 70, 80, 90 years, the fact is that our genome is passed on to our children, and for there to be major changes in that genome often takes hundreds of thousands of years. Let's contrast that to a regular old bacterium. I remember vividly when I was a sophomore, at the University of Buffalo, I had a course in microbiology, very intense course. Had to do labs every day of the week. And one of the things that we would study in that class is the fact that if I take a single bacterium and put it on a plate of nutrient agar and put it under the right environmental conditions, that one bacterium, due to the process of binary fission, they simply, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, over the course of 24 hours can turn into well over 100 billion new organisms. Okay, now, if nothing had changed in those 100 billion organisms, you would have the identical genome. There would be identical to the first bacterium that you put on that plate. But in the real world, things are always changing, okay? The fact is that the world is not a nice incubator with a plot of nutrient agar to be able to go on. Bacteria are exposed to air. They're exposed to the sun, which is the major progenitor of all evolution, ultraviolet radiation. That's one of the experiments that we do. You take a plate of bacteria, I remember it was Serratia marcescens, a red bacterium, expose it to 20 seconds of ultraviolet radiation under a lamp, then take a swab of it, put it on a new plate, and in 24 hours, some of the bacteria that grow are red, some are white, some are yellow. Unbelievable. Simply the pigment in that bacterium has been genetically modified due to an exposure to UV radiation, which of course is, that's nature. We're all exposed to UV radiation. All things are exposed to UV radiation. So what's the point? The point is that where it takes us tens or hundreds of thousands of years to genetically change in bacterial and viral populations, a single exposure to some environmental perturbation can change it in a matter of hours to days. So that's the key thing that worries, frankly, the hell out of public clinicians today. Okay, I was just reading. Let's talk about another organism. We keep talking about bacteria.
Can I let folks know? Can I let folks know that if they have a comment or a question, they can call in if you're in the United States to 919-518-9773, and if you're international, call to Skype using Computers 2K Voice, and we will. Or on the chat, and we have bunches of folks on the chat. So we're taking your comments, and I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Don't forget, we do have a little video if you want to use it.
Okay, right. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
All right. Here's where we're at. So we have these organisms. We have bacteria, which are a single cell, okay, with a nucleus in it, with a single strand of DNA in it. Very simple organism. We have a virus, which is not even a cell. All it is a protein capsule with a single strand of DNA and RNA in it. And when those things are exposed to anything in the natural world, they not only can be changed, they do change. Something that, is a topic of another one of your shows. But just yesterday, there was an article in our local paper talking about the fact that flu right now, influenza, a virus, is epidemic here in central North Carolina. But the joke is, and it's not funny, is that more than half the people that have come down with that flu had a flu vaccine this year, which was touted as being an outstanding vaccine. It contained, quote, all 3 common strains of the flu virus. Well, guess what? Between the time that the person had that vaccination several months ago and now, the virus has completely mutated to the point where literally half the people coming down with flu today are exposed to a different strain of that virus that was not present just several months ago. So this is scary, folks. I'm not trying to, I don't want to get on Does vaccination work? Does it not work? Or antibiotics work or not work? The fact is that we are in a never-ending battle with the microbial world. But here's the key. When we put environmental pressure on these organisms, we are pushing them to mutate and to resurge. Those are the two terms we use in microbiology. So let's give an example, okay? We have a child, okay? He's 7 years old, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor takes a swab and says, you have strep throat. You have Streptococcus aureus, you have a strep throat, it's positive. And he gives that mother a prescription for 4 amoxicillin pills per day, once every 4 hours for 10 days. Okay, and she goes to the store and she buys the antibiotic and she starts giving the child the pill. So, child takes it for 1 day, he's feeling a little better, takes it for 2 days, 3 days. Wow, feels a lot better. 4 days, okay, he looks at mom and says, I don't need that anymore, Mom. I feel perfectly fine. I'm going back to school and I got a baseball game this afternoon. And Mom says, oh, well, that's so wonderful. Aren't these drugs just terrific? And takes the rest of the drugs and puts them up in the medicine cabinet or throws them down the toilet. So here's what happens.
It's down the toilet.
Well, that's another story.
We're going to do another whole show on the quality of our water.
Exactly, on the drugs in our drinking water, which is unbelievable. So it goes down the toilet.
You didn't hear it.
Little Johnny had a strep throat, and he feels terrific, no problem. So let's just use numbers for the heck of it. He had 1 billion bacteria in his throat, which is not that a lot, by the way, but he had 1 billion bacteria in his throat, and this amoxicillin started killing them. And the way it does it is that it inhibits cell wall development on the bacteria. Okay, that is the mechanism by which it will prevent the bacteria from reproducing. It inhibits cell wall development through a certain enzyme system, which we don't have to go into. But the bottom line is that little Johnny feels wonderful after taking the drug for 4 days, and he has killed 99.999% of all the bacteria in his system, leaving 0.0001% of the bacteria still alive. Well, how'd that happen? Well, first of all, we just mentioned the fact that these are very simple organisms. They can change very easily due to exposure. All of a sudden, those bacteria are being exposed to a very powerful antibiotic, and it's looking at its neighbor and saying, oh, my God, they're dying, and this one's dying, and that one's dying, and yet one of them was able to change its own membrane system, its own cell wall system, that made it resistant to the antibiotic. And so there's now only 3 cells left in his throat. 3 cells won't do anything. It's not going to cause infection. It's not going to cause any type of redness. It's not going to cause fever or a headache. But Johnny stopped taking the antibiotic. All of a sudden, the concentration, called the titer, in his blood goes down. These are very quickly excreted drugs, okay, and they're gone within 12 hours. And those 3 bacteria say, hey, remember, they don't even need each other. They reproduce without sex. Asexual reproduction, binary fission. It divides, and it divides again. And guess what it divides into? Not the old wild strain, but the new mutant strain. And all of a sudden, a week later, Johnny wakes up with 104 fever, can't even breathe. His throat is all swollen up. They bring him to the doctor or the emergency room. They take a swab and find out he now has a resistant strain of Streptococcus in his throat, and they need a more powerful antibiotic. Keflex,
Do the next two
methicillin,
slides.
very powerful drugs. And you know what? As we keep going through these most powerful drugs, we are again putting environmental pressure on these simple organisms, forcing them, literally forcing them to change, to adapt. The title of this talk is Life Will Find a Way. They are adapting, and now we end up with things like MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. We end up with tuberculosis, another bacterium, in which, in major cities, our son works in an emergency room in New York. He has cases of TB coming in there that are incurable. The drugs that have been available now for 30 or 40 years won't touch them. So we are ending up with a system due to the misuse and abuse of antibiotic compounds that is pushing pathogen populations towards much greater virulence. That's number one. We do not have the tools to be able to fight them. And quite frankly, I have some friends that work down at the CDC in Atlanta. That's the Centers for Disease Control. And one of the things that they don't want to let you know is that one day there could be a global pandemic of a resistant organism that we basically created ourselves through the misuse of antibiotics that could literally kill hundreds of millions of people. We walk that tightrope every single day of the week. Any questions?
We also have jumping of species, recombination.
We'll get to that. Right.
So right now we're on slide number 17. I just quickly ran through a couple of other ones. Let's just go back and I'll tell you what we covered as a quick summary. We got a little bit of the history about after World War II and use in war for sepsis, and it became a wonder drug. The well-known antibiotics that we know, penicillin, streptomycin, erythromycin, antibiotics are, you said that was used as a powder directly on a wound, but they are also taken, we know, orally.
Shots.
And shots. And sometimes, when we get it as a liquid, they only last for so long. They're time limited.
Sure.
And then we have the effectiveness and safety record of antibiotics, which we're not really aware. Not everybody understands what that is. And we did not go into very much the change of producing from the natural penicillin, those molds that you first talked about, to the synthetic antibiotic. I don't know whether that would be a whole nother show, the fact that things are produced in the lab that are not really, they're synthetic and they're not from the natural origin of the molds and other living organisms. And then we took a look at the bacteria itself and the shape of it. That's slide number 12. How the fecundity of that, they can change in a fraction of a second, less than you can blink an eye, and that's how they can win over anything that we throw at them. A lot of people think about...
Well, the key point, Debbie, is that they're being forced to change. Bacteria have no. Remember, bacteria doesn't have a brain. Okay, it doesn't sit there and say, "Geez, I think I'm going to change today." This goes back to Darwin again. It has selective pressure on it in its environment. Either it is going to mutate or it is going to die. And therefore, as we've now learned, that selective pressure selects for a very tiny number of organisms that have adapted to that selective pressure, meaning the antibiotic in this case. Then they resurge and they become the dominant individual in the population. Now the antibiotic has absolutely no use whatsoever.
Okay, we have a question in the chat from John. Johnny is asking, in the scenario of a bacteria that cannot be dealt with, can homeopathy be successful?
Good question.
And that is a good question. Thank you so much for asking. It seems to me that homeopathy is based on similars, and we're not trying to kill anything. We're trying to live in harmony. We're enhancing a person's vital force, their ability to increase their immunity, their ability to live in harmony with, we're covered with millions of bacteria, with millions of organisms all the time.
Your body has approximately 6 pounds of bacteria on it and in it.
I think there was on the PowerPoint, there's actually a number that was calculated on slide number 13. According to William Whitman, a microbiologist at the University of Georgia, the number is 5 to the times 10 to the 30th power.
10 to the 30th.
I don't know how many zeros.
I use between 5 and 6 pounds of actual weight.
I think we can get an idea of 5 and 6 pounds. That's like 5 pounds of butter. Think about that.
Yeah.
So we're living in this. When I said it on the chat, our air and our water and our soil. This is our environment, and there are all of these microbes around us all the time. So everything is in balance, and we're healthy. But when it gets out of balance, that homeopathy is what takes symptoms from the messages that the body gives. So we take a case and we see, how is this person changed? And that's how we find out the remedy, the homeopathic remedy, that's going to help the body to heal from whatever is going awry. So yes, I would say many, many times that if you get the right remedy, you will heal if you have the strength. Now, if as a body you have deteriorated to a point where it's, you don't have the vital force anymore, in that case, homeopathy may only be palliative. So I hope that answers the question. Did you feel like I did?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to express it, because I think the major point that you're trying to make is that the whole idea behind homeopathy is that you are not targeting the pathogen, you're targeting the human being, the entire system of a person, to be able to heal itself, which is very, very different from that of allopathic medicine, in this case antibiotics, where basically you're trying to kill it. You're basically throwing a hand grenade into the body and blowing it up and hoping that you are going to eradicate that infection. Whereas, as we have just learned, we are in a race against time right now due to the misuse and the overuse of these antibiotics, where unfortunately many, if not most, of the strains of infections that are going around right now have basically complete resistance. Another example. Can I also, the thing that's in the news right now, the flu.
Yeah, okay. You know what I just heard on the news driving into the studio, that they have said that children under 18 years of age can no longer go to visit anyone in the hospital without a doctor's note, because it's almost like self-quarantine in the hospital because of the spread of the flu. I want to also
mention, even though the people are vaccinated against it, the strain of the flu that's now going around is resistant. And if you will recall, there was this new wonder drug that came out about 10 years ago, and the companies would have ads on television and radio saying, at the first hint of the flu, go to the doctor and get Tamiflu. Okay? Tamiflu is a drug made by Glaxo. It costs $19 a pill to get this very powerful antiretroviral drug. And the CDC had to announce this year that, again, due to the misuse and the overuse of Tamiflu, it has no effect different from that of placebo on all of the strains of flu that are out there. You're taking $19 of nothing by taking this pill because, again, people used it. The virus has a lot easier time mutating than even does a bacterium, okay, has built up a tolerance to it, and now the wild strains of all the influenza that are going around are completely immune or resistant to that of this powerful antiviral drug.
Take homeopathy. Take homeopathy. I want to mention, Amnon, you were just talking about the fact how our grandparents and our parents said, go out and play, dig in the dirt. Right. Get, and they even have proof of people who have cancer have a less rate of cancer if you live on a farm. Correct. Because you are out there working in the environment and getting exposed to all of these microbes, right? And you build up your immunity because maybe it's working in the reverse.
It's almost unequivocal now. When you take a look at people that live in a rural area out on the farm, the people we might call poor, okay, their immune systems, their ability to deal with natural infection is orders of magnitude higher than individuals living in an urban setting using antibacterial soap, antibacterial everything, using antibacterial mouthwash, taking 3 showers a day with antibacterial shampoo. Basically, what you're doing is taking several 100 million years of evolution of, as you just said, we have grown up with dirt, okay? I love using the comparison. When I spent time in the Himalayas, in Tibet and Nepal, we would jump into these pools of freezing water with some soap to try to scrape some of the schmutz off of our bodies, and the Sherpas would be standing around on the glacier laughing their brains out. Literally, they were having asthma attacks, rolling around in the snow, pointing at our ugly little white bodies, okay, in these pools from the glacial melt. How often does a Tibetan take a shower? The answer is 0.0 times during their lifetime. There's no such thing. No such thing as what we call standard hygiene. Their skin is encrusted with dead skin, all types of organisms, smoke, yak butter. You could smell them from a mile away, yet you have these old Tibetans living to be 100 years old due to the fact that their bodies have an immune system that has overcome virtually all of the indigenous pathogens and parasites in their environment.
Can I say something?
I'm not suggesting that we stop bathing.
Hello?
But I am going to suggest
I don't think it's going to... Am I on?
You're on.
I don't think it's going to go over well. Take a look at our television commercials for every kind of mouth, relationships.
Antibacteria, right.
The way that the Sherpas lived, I don't think it would go over well here in America, at least.
I'm not, as I just said, I am not suggesting that we stop bathing or brushing our teeth or whatever. All I am saying is that these people are human beings that live exactly the opposite way that we do, and yet they are fine. We are the ones that are constantly going to the doctor and the hospital for infections that basically we have brought upon ourselves.
Well, we have a question from Amnon. He wants to know: are we ever going to show that little movie, or should we just pass on the movie and say you're more exciting to listen to?
That's your choice. You're running the show.
Well, I would like to get a poll from those people who are out there listening. Say something to us. Call in, or
somebody can go can type in if they want to see a little movie.
Okay. So we
Okay?
have
But let's move on.
Dr.
Okay?
Ferenc says that modern cosmetics are dangerous, and we need
Well,
to.
because cosmetics are filled with lead and arsenic and all kinds of compounds. That's a different type of thing. But yes, they are dangerous.
Yeah, so we have now. Let me contrast this to the fact that we've learned, especially through war, that and in working in hospitals, that we need sanitation because
Yes.
more deaths occurred transferring the bacterium from the hands of the surgeons from patient to patient. So
But that makes sense.
okay, so you're saying only like in a case of an open wound or something or a hospital situation setting is different from a normal day-to-day activity setting.
Okay. Also, if you're in a hospital and they're doing surgery on you, they are opening up your body. Okay.
Yeah.
And if they're opening any type of a wound, I think everybody would agree that cleansing it is a good idea. Okay. Because you have all types of indigenous things out there. You have tetanus bacteria. You have things in the soil that could get into an open wound. I don't think anybody would deny the fact that dressing and keeping wounds clean are the proper thing to do. That is a lot different than being exposed to a constant flux of antibacterial compounds that we're being exposed to. But I want to move on to a new subject right now, if we could.
Okay.
Okay. Here we've been talking about the misuse of antibiotic compounds by virtue of our mortality and morbidity in the physician setting, the hospital setting. Being sick, I'm sick, mommy says give Johnny antibiotic. Johnny gets antibiotic and he's in the emergency room 2 days later, okay? 2 weeks later because he has a resurgence. And now he has to be put on an intravenous drip of a powerful antibiotic in order to be able to get cured. We see this more and more and more. But there's something else going on in our environment that we touched on a few minutes ago, and it is now beginning, and I say beginning in terms of public acknowledgement,
Okay,
public
I think I have a slide for
realization,
that.
whereas the, quote, scientific community has known literally for 30 years that indeed it's been going on, and that's man-made antibiotics in our environment, okay? Here's something that I know riles a lot of people up, and it probably should. Right now, if anybody listening in goes to their food store and they are buying any type of product that has its derivation from an animal, that's all dairy products, okay, milk and cheese, all meat products, and, it doesn't matter where it's at. It could be ground beef, it could be chicken, it can be pork, unless it is USDA certified. Now we're talking about the United States. Every country has their own certification mechanisms. But unless it is USDA certified as organic, meaning no drugs, no antibiotics are fed to these animals, basically they can be assured that chicken they are eating for lunch today has been grown, drenched in antibiotics in its water, in its food, in injections that are given to it, okay? Basically, when a chick is born, the first thing it does is get an injection of antibiotics. When a pig gives birth, every baby is given initially an injection of antibiotics. The mother is given food in which the milk that she feeds those mammal babies with is loaded with antibiotics, and it receives antibiotics in its food and water to the day it is slaughtered. Here's the bottom line, is that not only are we having tremendous amounts of resistance due to our human misuse, but the ubiquitous use of antibiotics in the production of food, at least in this country, is so completely out of hand, we can measure it in the tissues of the animals. That's called meat. We can measure it in milk. Okay? The hormones, bovine stimulating hormone, streptococcus, streptomycin, that's given as injections to these animals to prevent bacterial infections of their udders and the various parts of their bodies. We can measure it there, and now, of course, a topic for another show, is we can measure it in our drinking water in virtually every major city in the United States.
We're all getting drugged. We're all getting...
You are getting drugged.
And as we get drugged, we're forcing the change in the mutation.
You got it. You got it. Is that not simply the misuse of antibiotic compounds in human beings, but the ubiquitous use of it in our food supply, our drinking water supply, has brought us to the point where, I mean, it sounds kind of drastic, but we are being bathed internally and externally with antibiotic compounds, man-made drugs, every day of our lives. You walk into a shower, okay, you assume that your water is clean. There are dozens of different man-made drugs in it, including antibiotics, hormones, and steroids. And don't forget that your skin absorbs these compounds. So you say, come on, Dr. Bruck, you mean if I take a shower, I'm going to get killed by these things? And of course, the answer is probably no. What we don't know is what is the chronic, long-term exposure. Our bathing water, our drinking water, our washing water, the meat, the cheese, the milk products that we eat, each one of which, unless it is certified to be chemically free, what does these picograms, nanograms, micrograms, or milligrams of these compounds being introduced into our bodies every single hour of every single day?
And think about the developing, and think about from infancy, when you're really developing yourself as a human being and your children. That's going to place a really important effect upon them. I want to mention Phyllis Georgic in the chat is saying that homeopaths have used these various antibiotics and steroids as nosodes to use to clear it is necessary to clear out from the patient. So I think that one thing is isodes or isopathic medicine, which are similar, which are the same. So clearing the effects of these antibiotics and then using nosodes.
Well, you know what it comes down to. I mean, if homeopathy wanted to do a favor to the human race, we're going to find protocols. Maybe we already have them that you could discuss, but we're going to have to find protocols to virtually detoxify the human body. How do we get these compounds out of our body? Remember that many of these compounds are lipophilic, lipophilic. They adhere to fat molecules in our body.
Right.
We wonder why things like breast cancer, okay, are rampant. And if you don't think that these correlations have been made, I got news for you. Why is it that your grandmother's generation, before antibiotics were found, before these synthetic hormones were found in our food, our environment, and our medicines, had about a 1 in 90 chance of having metastatic breast cancer, and now it's 1 in 5 of every woman in this country
it went down to 1 in 5?
Will be diagnosed with breast cancer. There has to be a reason for it, and the reason cannot be genetics. We already affirmed that.
Okay.
That it takes tens of thousands of years to evolve in a positive or negative way, not a single generation. So there's something that we are putting in our environment, okay, and things like antibiotics, hormonal compounds are on the top of the list in terms of the things that are contaminating our body. I mean, it seems that a protocol for detoxifying human beings would be in very high demand.
Well, there's a problem because if it's constantly in the environment, then it's an obstacle to cure. It's something that's there that, you know,
right.
So that is, unless we do mutate as humans, unless all of this impacts us and forces humans to mutate in such a way that they can withstand the changes in our environment. I wanted to mention all of the studies that show that mastitis in cows have homeopathic remedies that are much more effective than antibiotics for cure. And with all of the knowledge that we have and with all of the history and data acknowledging that antibiotics are ineffective in so many cases and are causing these resistant strains, how come the medical and research world is not more accepting of homeopathy and looking at alternative means? Instead, they are suppressing it.
How about money?
Well,
Okay,
but do they not care about?
Take a look at a Wisconsin dairy cow herd, okay? You have 1,000 female cows there that are producing milk every day. Part of the normal, we're not talking about organic. We're talking about normal commercial grown milk by using every other week. Did you hear what I just said? Every 14 days, massive injections. This is what the vet comes into the herd, okay, every other week, massive injections of antibiotics. It's a cocktail of antibiotics plus bovine stimulating hormone. They are able to take the production of a standard dairy cow up from about 12 pounds of milk a day to 23 or 24 pounds of milk per day. The purpose of a milk grower is to grow milk. Okay, I'm not saying that they are callous people, but the fact is that we're talking about the economics of being able to literally double the amount of milk that they are able to produce on a per cow basis by the use of these drugs. That's the excuse that they're going to use to you. And remember that, you know, we're talking about very conservative people. These have been developed by veterinarians at universities over scores of years, and these techniques are proven. Now, if you ask them, well, what about all the drugs that are coming through in that milk? And it does. You can measure it. I mean, this is not a matter of speculation. It can be measured. The response will be, oh, there ain't enough of them to do any damage to nobody. But, of course, they don't know that. That's what they're being told by the pharmaceutical companies that sell millions of dollars of these drugs to, in this case, the milk or the cattle industry every year. This is the problem, Debbie, is that you're talking about things that are proven to work in terms of bottom line profits. Farmers don't give all these drugs out to these animals for the hell of it, okay? They are not injecting a newborn chick with antibiotics because they think it's fun. They're doing it because decades of research has shown that they get a higher rate of return. More chicks live, they get fatter, they get bigger faster. In the case of broiler chickens, their breasts grow at a rate twice the speed by giving antibiotics and hormones, and then you end up with the situation, if I can grow this broiler chicken in 5 weeks and have this huge 2-pound breast on it, I'm going to make more money than if I grow it organically And this is what is simply known as standard operating procedure.
Okay, so
money drives these corporations.
Okay, so all that they care about are short-term gains, because the long term, it's the opposite of a gain. They
but not for them.
Even for them, because their little
little
little chicks are not going to be able to survive when they continue this type of procedure because of, as you say, the mutation and the force.
Absolutely. Sooner or later, there will be strains. Sooner or later, there will be strains that are going to evolve in these populations where you will literally wipe out an entire sector of the chicken industry. Okay, let's talk about something that really happens.
We have it all the time. We have E. coli, we have salmonella, we have all sorts of things cropping up in farms everywhere around the world.
Bird flu in Asia. Bird flu basically began in Asia of an influenza virus that went from a natural population into the herds of chickens and ducks. They figured initially that by giving them all kinds of antibiotics, that they would strengthen the resistance. And in fact, now it is endemic. Throughout the area, they have to kill millions of animals every year, okay, due to outbreaks of, in this case, a virus and not a bacterium. But now let's talk about the next thing on the list. One of your favorite terms are jumping genes, Debbie.
Yep.
Okay? Jumping genes. And here is what we are really, we keep on talking about my friends at the Centers for Disease Control and what they're afraid of. This is the one that they are probably more afraid of than any other component of this entire topic. Basically, what a jumping gene simply means is that, let's just take a look at life. Let's take a look at animals, okay? If we take a look at animals, okay, a pig, a horse, a monkey, a human being, okay, we share over a 99% complementarity of genes, okay? We're talking about mammals now. We share a 99% complementarity of the genes in our bodies. It is very few genes that actually make the difference, that create you as you and me and a pig as a pig. Well, let's talk about various types of problems that are going on. Basically, you have diseases that are in different populations of different animals. Cats get cat disease. Pigs get pig disease. Humans get human disease. On the other hand, what we are now learning is a double dose here. The more human beings are living in close proximity to large animal populations, these are CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding, organizations or operations, CAFO, that are now run all over the world. That's how we feed people. You find them in Asia, all over Africa, CAFOs. And by people living near them, and by using drugs on these animals to try to keep them healthy, we are pushing their endemic natural diseases to mutate, and all of a sudden you end up with swine flu. You end up with bird flu. Where do you think those names came from? These literally are diseases that have been known for decades in swine or in chickens and ducks, and now they are mutating within the proximity of human beings so that they are jumping the genes in those particular bacterium and or viruses, are changing ever so slightly that they can now combine with human DNA. They can react in a human body and disrupt human physiology, and we end up, in a situation where these animal diseases are being transferred to human populations.
This has never happened in the history of the planet.
Never happened. Never happened. If you were a farmer, you had 2 pigs, you had 5 chickens, you had a horse, you grew your corn or whatever, and that was your operation. Those are the kinds of farmers worldwide today that are bankrupt. They can no longer practice agriculture because economically it don't work. Okay, in North Carolina, just to give you an example, I mean, it's a horrendous example. We have a population of 9.7 million people in North Carolina. On any given day, because they rotate day after day after day, there are 21 million pigs in North Carolina, over double the number of human beings in pigs. North Carolina slaughters over 7.2 million chickens a day, every day, okay? These are huge, huge operations, and the way that they maintain those operations is by drugging these animals to the point where they can get them to live long enough and produce enough meat in a short amount of time in order to be able to turn a profit. The health ramifications, okay, they're not worried about the health of the animal, trust me, okay? These animals are sick as hell when they go to the slaughterhouse. The fact is that they got a lot of meat on them, and that's all that matters. That's, you know, of course, the excuse is, well, that's why they were born in the first place. That's why we created them, in order to be able to eat them. On the other hand, their bodies are now transferred into our bodies, and we end up every year coming down with more and more chronic human disease, more and more strains of salmonella and listeria and all kinds of organisms that are highly resistant. Okay, you mentioned E. coli before, highly resistant to our antibiotics. And indeed, we have a major problem on our hands that, frankly, the mainstream in the pharmaceutical industry, in the agricultural industry, will deny the existence of these problems.
Phyllis Georgic in the chat is a wonderful resource of information. She tells us that pigs are have like very similar to human genes. That is why it is cannibalism to eat them. Well, she says swine flu is only because of the chemical and biological warfare machine that has cultured them. Anthrax is not the same as anthrax of 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It is now only pharmaceutical grade due to the vaccine industry's culturing processes. They are now looking into growing the cells on some mesh material to just grow cuts of meat and forget the raising of animals who needs to eat and need to excrete. And I put up on the slides.
Yeah, she's talking about cloning of animal tissue, right?
Yeah, they're doing cloning. Yeah, just we don't really need to eat the way we did for thousands and thousands of years.
That's correct.
I put up on the slide a couple of slides from the CDC 2010 list of infectious diseases. Just to take a quick look, we have from anthrax to West Nile virus, and all of these things are getting out of hand. The incidence is rising. Botulism, wounds, brucella, cankers. Let's go down to the next slide, which would be dengue fever. And we didn't even talk about global warming effects and the spread of disease. That will have to be in another show because we're really out of time. Dengue fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, and we know this is out of hand.
Giardia, in the United States now.
Yep, giardia, gonorrhea, hepatitis of all strains and varieties. The next page has got Lyme disease, especially here, along the East Coast in the Rocky Mountains, in the North Carolina and the southern states. The measles has come back, the mumps. So we're seeing the whooping cough also coming back. Acute, chronic rabies. Rabies is now endemic in the wild populations, and it's a big problem. Rubella, salmonella, shigellosis, smallpox. What about smallpox? Somebody told, I was just reading Heidi Stevenson in Gaia Health. I recommend people go to Gaia Health. She said that the smallpox vaccine isn't even, the source of the vaccination doesn't even come from a similar disease. Usually you think that you're going to be creating this vaccination, immunization.
No, Debbie, that's the way it's always been. Smallpox vaccine is made out of cowpox.
It's a completely different...
Right, it's a different organism, but supposedly it cross-protects against smallpox. But again, as you pointed out, we have a resurgence of smallpox around the world right now. And of course, is it the same smallpox that Pasteur dealt with 150 years ago? The answer is unquestionably no. Okay?
Okay, so then, yep.
These are all new. They're changing.
Everything
constantly.
is changing. And you know what? Even our plant varieties are not the same plant varieties that they were hundreds of years ago because of the changes of what we've done to our soils and our air. We have changed the strains. We have hybridized. We've done so many other things. Let's see. We've got strep. That's MRSA. That's out of hand. Resistant strains of strep is rampant. And then
you're talking about staph. Yeah, basically resistant staph right now. If the worst place you could ever go is a hospital, as a lot of people say, because there are hospitals where it is so fully entrenched in their walls, in their carpet, everywhere else, that basically, if you have any kind of a wound on your body, you're going to end up getting this infection that is basically incurable.
You mean Lysol's not going to help us? We used to spray Lysol. I mean, that was what we were told to do. Now we have...
well, you know what? Again, Lysol's great. It takes care of 99.999. Read the label. It even says that.
Gosh.
It's what it doesn't kill.
Right.
That you have the problem with. Okay?
Oh, so we can't kill our enemy. We have to love our enemy. I think that's what... We do have to love our enemy. That's really the only answer. So the last bit of the list of CDC, we have tetanus, toxic shock syndrome, tuberculosis. Whoa, that one is going up. We're having a big problem with that.
Well, TB is one of the largest fears right now as being a resurgent disease that could become epidemic in urban populations. Basically, we have had drugs, the antibiotics, that have been very successful against TB. And that's a really good, here's a good anecdote for you about TB. And it's exactly the way we started off talking about the use of antibiotics. Tuberculosis basically was one of the most egregious diseases that you could have up until the development of antibiotics. Beginning in the 1960s and 70s, a great deal of work went into it, and they found a cocktail of antibiotics that could be used. Now, here's the problem. If you are diagnosed with TB, and I've known 3 people, I literally have 3 students who have had TB. Many of them lived in foreign countries like India. Bottom line is that they are put on a 6-pill-a-day regimen for a minimum of 6 months. The bottle of medicine, they literally hand it out to them. You can speak to your son, Debbie, okay? When they have a person who comes in and they diagnose TB, think of a pickle jar. A large pickle jar holding like 50 pickles that you get at Walmart. It is filled with pills. and they give that to them. These people can't afford medicine. They give them a container, it's plastic, that has approximately 10,000 pills in it, and they are instructed that they are required to take 6 of these a day for 6 months. Well, guess what happens? It's the exact same story we talked about with little Johnny. They'll take it for 3 weeks. They'll take it for a month. And guess what? They're feeling better. Their breathing comes back. They do not have the problems they had, and they stop taking it. What do you have? A resurgence of the tuberculosis bacterium, and you end up with what is now, particularly in many urban areas, incurable TB. I emphasize that word,
and we're going to
incurable. There are no drugs that will cure it due to the resurgence of resistant varieties due to the misuse of antibiotics.
We're going to have some of the homeopathic experts come on and give us a talk about tuberculosis in these
I think
countries.
The homeopathic experts are going to have to come on and give a lot of talks about a lot of diseases.
Yes,
because I'm afraid in the next 20 or 30 years, you're going to be talking about dozens of human diseases that, for all intents and purposes, using allopathic medicine, are going to be incurable. You're not going to be able to do it.
We're not putting our finances, energy, and research into the right direction. Instead of constantly these anti-drugs, we need to look at boosting the human population and their ability to survive using lifestyle, nutritional changes, things like that. I was mentioning on the chat with Phyllis about, she said that tuberculosis is used as a chemotherapy for bladder polyps in older men. It's injected into the bladder, and the patients are asked to not use public toilets for 3 to 5 days after this procedure. And what about the sewer system that they are using in their own homes? It makes you think. And we do know, if you've been listening to the news, that they're now doing fecal transplants for people are taking the fecal matter to repopulate their own gut. And
yes,
the major thing about us is that our guts have all of these microbes, these bacteria that are helpful and healthy and help us to digest and absorb.
Pounds of them.
And every time we take an antibiotic or something,
we
wipe out the major functioning factors of our own bodies, and now we have to reinvest and put in the nutrition, and somehow...
Basically, the words homeopathy and antibiotics are antithetical. They're doing exactly the opposite things to the human body. Okay, but as you pointed out, basically an antibiotic regime is chemical warfare on organisms in your body. We already established that 5 to 6 pounds of your body are bacteria that are supposed to be there. That's how you've evolved. If that makes people sick or nauseous to think about it, well, I'm sorry. That's what you're made out of.
Do the next one of the list.
Okay? And by being made out of that, when you take these powerful antibiotics, you are literally wiping out the flora from your skin, from your intestines, from your alimentary tract, and you are then reducing your own immunity. Those things are there for a purpose. These positive bacteria that are in your body secrete enzymes and secrete things that keep your body healthy. So the bottom line is that by using antibiotics, and remember, you say, some people are listening right now, and they're saying, well, I'm not using antibiotics. Well, you weren't listening well enough, because we just established the fact that if you're drinking water or eating food, you are taking antibiotics every single day of your lives. How much of it
causes a plug for the water bottle?
We don't know. We're going to get into BPA water bottles now, right?
Well, besides the bisphosphenol A and the plastics and the hormone disruptors, I'm gonna give a plug for the Purity water bottle, which is a filtration system that we're going to be having that available for folks who want to drink water that is uncontaminated and not affected by all of these kinds of drugs that are in our water. So we'll talk about that in an upcoming show. I put up on the screen a moment ago, Dr. Bob, that U.S. infectious disease deaths rise markedly. This was written in 1996 in the Times. Counting virtually every American who died from 1980 to 1992, federal researchers have found that deaths from infectious diseases, formerly on the decline, rose 58% over that period, jumping from the fifth to the third leading killer. And if we go to slide number 28, and we didn't mention AIDS, but that was at one time a huge epidemic. It counts for the rise. The researchers also documented a surprising increase in hard-to-explain respiratory infections among the elderly and blood infections among people of all ages. And we were talking about TB, that these respiratory diseases are so easily communicable simply by coughing and sneezing and blowing, in the air. If you've ever seen a picture of what that spray looks like, it's very highly contagious.
Well, it's very interesting. I sort of have a morbid hobby that I undertake. We get the New York Times every day, and very often you will read about the obituaries of some very famous people. This a couple of days ago, Norman Schwarzkopf, the general, died kind of unexpectedly at 78. Take a look at the cause of death. More often than not, complications of pneumonia. Pneumonia, okay? These are diseases caused by bacteria, fungi, and virus.
30.
And basically, these are the kinds of infectious diseases that, well, wait a second. We took care of those. We have antibiotics. We have antivirals. We have antifungals. Well, guess what? You see a remarkable resurgence of these, as you're saying, respiratory diseases that end up killing people. The thing that they're not telling you is that the guy was in the hospital. The guy was being given massive amounts of antibiotics to get rid of the pneumonia, and guess what? Didn't work, okay? That's the little secret they're not telling you, is that these people are dying, okay, from pneumonia when we are basically talking about diseases that allegedly can be dealt with antibiotics. The number is going up all the time. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on in the chat here. Phyllis is saying that there are so many good bacterium that it is in the bronchi that are killed by the antibiotics to the point of causing lung cancer. We will all die of pneumonia. When you can no longer get up and walk around, our lungs fill with fluid and we are drowned. And then also I had put up the slide that was written in 1996 questioning, is this still true? Number 30, underuse of pneumonia vaccine is imperiling thousands of Americans. So, this is the rhetoric that we hear. Although the vaccine is recommended for everyone over 65, no more than 30% of the people in the age group receive it, according to the National Center for Health Statistics. We might also add that the CDC continues to put out a couple of statistics saying that, let's say, influenza vaccine is only, either 40 or 60% effective?
Yep.
It's the effectiveness rate is so low that wouldn't there be other ways that we could...
That's in a normal year. What they're finding out right now is at least in eastern United States is that the flu vaccine is meaningless. People who had the flu vaccine are getting flu. That the strain that is now developed is completely immune to the vaccine. So this idea of vaccinating against everything, sooner or later we're going to learn that panacea is a lot of BS, that it does not cause a quote, significant reduction in a population. As a matter of fact, what it can be doing, back to step one, is pushing these viruses and bacteria into mutating into more aggressive forms of pathogens that would not have been part of the indigenous population of those pathogens, thus causing more human misery and suffering and death. So, the question really comes down to, and it needs a hard look, and I know some people do take that look, but they are thwarted by the powers that be of saying, we need to relook at allopathic medicine in the sense of, are we, in the long run, helping humanity or actually thwarting our own goals by the use of this, quote, chemical warfare that we have induced on our entire population?
I'm going to tell you we're coming to the close. We went over half an hour. I'm going to say a couple of thank yous. I'm also going to do a couple of quotes, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
One is Martin H. Fisher, who says, quote, "Bacteria keeps us from heaven and puts us there." So you catch that? It's kind of deep. And then we have another one that is also from Martin H. Fisher. And, the spices of life. Don't forget that the flavors of wine and cheese depend upon the types of infecting microorganisms. Basically, we're saying that love these little microorganisms. We drink our kombucha. We eat fermented foods and vegetables and all sorts of things that make us healthy. And so maybe Phyllis will do a whole show on fermented foods because she might be the expert on that. I want to thank you for spending the last day of the year with us. That would be slide 35. Looking forward to a better world and creating waves of awareness in 2013. I want everyone to think about what we've been learning, share this information, tell folks to listen to the archive of the show, watch it, and what can you do? Make one change in your life that will benefit your nuclear family and the people around you. Whether you've been using those antibacterial soaps, you now know it is not a good thing to do that because you're forcing the microbes to mutate and create a resistant strain.
There are discussions about banning it, by the way.
Wonderful. Probably we'll start with the mayor in New York City because he's the one who's doing all that, no soda, no hydrogenated vegetables.
No fat.
We like him. I'm kind of good with, I know it's a little bit.
He's called Mama Bloomberg. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And we're having great experts coming up on future shows. If you have any suggestions, we would love to hear about them. Tell folks on Twitter, Facebook, on your own websites, social networks, stumble upon and all those. And you could put a link into your emails when you're sending out a message to your friends. Number 36 is the list of upcoming shows. We're going to have Dr. Bruck is going to come back and talk about our water. Wendy Hewlett, she's the homeopath to the stars, and we're going to learn about her life and what she's been doing. Kate Birch and Cilla Watcott talking about homeoprophylaxis again. Stephen Blake, we haven't talked about the veterinary aspect of homeopathy. He is a animal whisperer. So we're going to learn about keeping your pets healthy. Janie Goddard, has been to some conferences about the revolution in health. Senya is going to talk about astrology and homeopathy and give us a case of stammering and stuttering. Phyllis, waving hello over there to you. Phyllis, you're going to be talking about back to health naturally. And don't you want to see me? You're looking at a slide? Oh, okay.
You tell me.
Okay. I'm directing the producer here now. Dr. Muhammad Rafiq is going to talk about acute diseases in homeopathy. Dr. Philip Hoekstra, who was previously on the show talking about detecting cancers through the thermoscan and thermography, he's going to talk about the effect of Fukushima and radiation in our environment. That would be another one of those forces that change and create mutations. Dr. Isaac Golden, who is like a stunning speaker on homeopathy and contagious infectious disease, will come back with new material.
Sounds like you got the whole year planned out.
No, that's just a couple of shows. We need to fill up the, how many, 52 weeks is close to that. If anybody has suggestions, if anybody has speakers that they would like to hear talk, please have them contact me. Thank you to Amnon. Thank you to Nissan Communications. Volunteers. Does anybody out there want to volunteer? I could use some help. The newsletter has waned because I just don't have enough hours in the day and night. If somebody wants to help me to put out the announcements for these shows and to write some blogs, we would love to get some extra hands. If you want to donate, you can go to Homeopathy World Community, and there is a menu item to donate on that page. Blog Talk Radio, we're going to have a show. Wednesday, 10:30 a.m. with Dr. Adil Chimtalawala Kasim, cardiologist who talks about heart health and homeopathy. We study the repertory, the chest chapter, and those rubrics, and we also have special topics. Whatever you ask him, he always has a great story, experience, life experience, and an answer. Thursday at noon, we have Alan Phillips, attorney at law, talking about vaccines and your rights in the United States. So we're going to just put up that disclaimer. I want to send waves of awareness, lots of love. Let's keep the energy flowing. Let's make this a better world and a better year. We depend upon you. Love is really the answer. So send feedback, send comments. We're going to sign off because Amnon wants lunch.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Health, happiness, joy, peace, everything good. Bye-bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays 9 a.m. till noon. Carrie's Psychic Cafe with Carrie Silkowski, Sundays 8 till 9 p.m. Health In with Debby Bruck, Mondays 11 a.m. till noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays 8 till 9 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays 9 till 10 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by thatvidblasterguy.com, carolinaapparel.com, and deltaforce.net.